Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews here, and there is a huge vote that's happening this weekend that could have major implications when it comes to the future of universal basic income right here in Canada. Now, whether you are someone who largely supports UBI or someone who thinks that it may not be the best idea for Canada going forward, it's important to keep your eyes on this vote because it's going to determine whether or not there's more of a push for that right here. We're talking about the Liberal National Policy Convention that's happening from Thursday to Saturday of this week. Now, this is a really important convention that's typically held in person with thousands of people all collectively gathering in a convention center. But now, because of COVID, of course, it's all online. And during this convention, they're going to vote on a huge amount of things that are going to determine the Liberal policy going forward into the potential next election. And one of these resolutions, actually two of these resolutions, have to do with universal basic income. So in today's video, we're going to go over exactly what these resolutions are, what they mean for Canada, how they might be implemented, and what this actually means for the likelihood of this actually happening here in Canada. Let's take a look at exactly what's going on here. But before we do, make sure to check out the links in the description where you can open up your own investment accounts and take your wealth into your own hands, and we can see how important that is these days. All right, let's look at this first policy, and we're going to sort of explain what this is all about. So this is the official Liberal website for this policy convention that's about to happen. Now, the way this all works is that they're going to have a number of different resolutions. This is what they're called before the party actually votes on them. Various different groups that are within the party can present these resolutions, and if it garners enough support, a majority support, it becomes policy of the political party, the Liberal Party. And there are two different ways that these resolutions can make it into the position where they're actually voted on. The first one is resolutions from the national prioritization vote, and the second one is from fast-tracked resolutions. Now let me explain exactly what these are. I'll zoom in here a little bit so you can see a little more clearly. It says the top 30 resolutions from the national prioritization vote and one fast-tracked resolution submitted by each province, territory commission, and national caucus. So these are the ones that they're going to vote on. When they talk about the national prioritization vote here, this is something that was held last month where everybody who's a member of the Liberal Party could vote on which resolutions they thought were the most important to be voted on during this convention. And lo and behold, universal basic income was one of them. Now, the fast track resolution route for a resolution to make it into this voting process is actually all of the different groups and each different province, their Liberal parties are able to fast track one resolution to be voted on at this convention, even if it doesn't make it up the list when it comes to the national prioritization vote. So there's one universal basic income vote that came from the fast track resolutions route, and there's one that came from the resolutions from the national prioritization vote. Now, when it comes to the national prioritizations vote, it's more likely that this would actually get full support because it was actually voted in by the Liberals who are going to be now voting on it, right? Whereas a fast track resolution that makes it into this voting stage at the policy convention, it would be less likely to pass because it could just be fast-tracked in by one individual group instead of actually being voted in like the resolutions from the national prioritization vote. But now let's take a closer look at exactly what these UBI resolutions are that are going to be voted on this Saturday. So I found the document that actually goes over each of these individual resolutions and what they're actually going to be voting on. Now, this is the one from the national prioritization vote. So again, this is the one that's more likely to go through. And just to be clear, where they're saying whereas here, whereas, this is all just referencing evidence that they're using to support the resolution that they're going to make at the end of this document. So let's go over it point by point. So this resolution number 3374, this is called a universal basic income for Canada. It says, whereas the government of Canada has committed to the reduction of poverty by 50% by 2030 through the poverty reduction strategy. So again, this is a point that they're using to support their idea to implement a UBI. They say, whereas we face a rapidly changing economy, artificial intelligence and automation will increase the precarity of work and create a new normal where most people change careers several times over their working lives. So again, they're bringing points in here to support their thesis. I think it's interesting that they're bringing up artificial intelligence and automation here because typically we haven't seen a lot of people use this as the reason that a political party is going to push for a universal basic income. And I think it's one that's more likely to be a thing that actually pushes this forward because, of course, with the advances of technology, there are less jobs in those areas that this technology can replace. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. thing, but it has to be handled in the right way. So it's interesting that they're sort of looping that in here. They continue saying, whereas low and moderate income Canadians are the most vulnerable to workforce disruption by artificial intelligence automation, according to a report by the Canada Centre for Policy Alternatives, whereas there is evidence to suggest that people on universal basic income will be more likely to go back to school or start small businesses, and whereas universal basic income reduces bureaucracy with no strings attached, coverage determining who is eligible is far simpler, and the cost of administering benefits is greatly reduced. So these are all the points that they're using to argue in favor of implementing this universal basic income. What they're essentially saying here is low-income Canadians are going to be more displaced by artificial intelligence technology, so we need UBI. This is their words, not mine necessarily. They say that because of UBI, more people would start small businesses, go back to school, increase their education, potentially increasing the economic output. That's what they're arguing here. And then here is saying that they could actually reduce the cost that the government has to pay to implement different programs like EI and all of the funds behind the CRA implementing certain programs. They wouldn't actually have to pay as much in terms of these operating costs, because if they have a no strings attached model, they would largely be able to accept more people. You wouldn't have to do as much verification, and as a result, things could be streamlined in their view. And I just want to take a second to say that it's not my job here on the channel to either push for or root against universal basic income or any political position. My goal here on the channel is just to bring you the information so that you can make up your mind whether you're in large support of something like this or whether you think it's an awful idea. It's important to know what's going on around this news, no matter where you think it's going to take Canada in the future. But let's get back into it, because there are a couple more whereas statements here before we get into what this resolution actually is. They go on to say that whereas 8.7% of Canadians live below the poverty line, 20% of Canadians live in the bottom 40% of incomes, and a UBI will ensure that communities at risk, including Indigenous peoples, are able to feel financially secure, and whereas UBI increases bargaining power for workers because a guaranteed unconditional income gives them leverage to say no to exploitative wages and poor working conditions. I can't talk today, you guys. All right, so what they're saying here in these two statements is that, okay, this is going to help communities most at risk in their view, and also this is going to make it so that people can say no to unsafe work conditions or work conditions where they just simply don't feel like they're getting paid enough to work in that area. Now, this is a large issue right now. You're seeing the headlines about Amazon workers and delivery drivers having poor work conditions. So what they're arguing here is that people would be able to say no to those poor work conditions if they have this sort of basic income. So this is the be it resolved section where they're actually going to say what this resolution is and what they want to force the Liberal Party to do. They say, be it resolved that through a process of intersectional consultation with stakeholders and political parties, the Government of Canada introduce a UBI for all Canadians. And be it further resolved that given the success of the CERB program, that UBI will assist seniors and low-income Canadians as they try to maintain an adequate standard of living regardless of working status. So these are the things they actually want to be implemented into the Liberal policy going forwards. And this resolution was sponsored or put forward by the Young Liberals of Canada and the Liberal Party of Canada from Ontario. And something that's interesting here is that it seems like after the national prioritization vote that we already talked about before, that this has actually gotten a lot of priority. Now, I'm not sure if this is actually in order of where they landed on the vote, but here are all the different policies that were implemented based on this national prioritization vote. And you'll see here the third one that's introduced inside of this package is a universal basic income. So that could point towards the fact that maybe during this national prioritization vote, this was the third highest or third most voted on thing to be included in this policy convention. So that could make you believe that it's more likely that this is actually going to be supported and voted through with a majority at this policy convention. Now, this is a pretty interesting resolution that they're bringing in here because, of course, they go through that whereas section where they note all of their evidence and all the things that they're trying to use to support their resolution. But in the actual resolution, this is where they use some pretty aggressive language. They don't go and say, hey, we want to implement another pilot project. We want to do more research. That's not what they're saying here. What they're saying is they're essentially telling the Liberal Party, hey, we want you to implement this, make it happen, rather than doing more research on it, which could take years and years, which is what the position has previously been, that they just want to gather more and more data to see what a program like this would actually look like. But there's actually a second resolution that's going to be voted on about universal basic income, and it's a little less aggressive when it comes to the language of its actual resolution. And as a result, it could get some more support from more of the moderate liberals who wouldn't want to push forward a universal basic income without more evidence. Let me show you exactly what I'm talking about. So this is the second resolution that's going to be voted on Saturday, and it was actually brought in not through the national prioritization vote where people vote to determine what's going to be voted on at this policy. It's like a pre-vote for the vote. This wasn't implemented through that. It was actually fast-tracked. So that could make you believe that maybe this wouldn't get as much support because it wasn't voted on through the national prioritization. It was just brought forward by individual groups. And its resolution name is A Canadian Basic Income, Rethinking Canada's Tomorrow, and it's resolution number 3375. I think you can't see that behind my head here. But it says, whereas COVID-19 exposed serious gaps in federal and provincial safety nets, and whereas economic stability is key to equality of opportunity and dignity, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has a right to standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of themselves and their families, and whereas income is a primary social determinant of health, yet precarious work is a growing concern, and millions of Canadians still live in poverty at great cost to our society. Remember, these are all the points that they're leading into their resolution as supporting points to support the resolution that they want to get enough yes votes on to make actual official liberal policy. Now they continue here saying, whereas a basic income would secure household purchasing power, address the stigma attached to being a welfare recipient, and signal that Canadians are best placed to determine their immediate needs. And whereas a basic income would simplify benefit applications for Canadians in need, allow for merging of government programs, and reduce administrative costs for government. And finally, the last, or maybe there's one more after this, but whereas the Canada Emergency Response Benefit was a progressive and transformative program that supported 8.8 million Canadians, proving to be both effective and popular. So these are a bunch of the whereases. Now these, again, are going to determine what they want to actually put forward in their resolution. So whether you support this or not, these are the points that they're making. They're saying, hey, it's a human right to have this certain standard of living. That's going to support UBI in their eyes. And they say that because income is actually a health concern, if you have a higher income, it's more likely that you're a healthier person, given the data that they looked at. They want to encourage that this be implemented so that people have more positive health outcomes, as well as saying, hey, it's going to reduce the stigma behind receiving these government supports, receiving welfare. Many people are ashamed of this because they feel like it means that they haven't been a success in their life, even though many people go through different circumstances. Now, they go on to say that, again, just like the previous resolution that we talked about, that this could reduce administrative costs for the government because some programs could be rolled into this basic income instead of having a whole bunch of different sectors and having to pay for their staffs in order to implement these different programs. And they even go so far as to cite the CERB, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, as a good test for what UBI could look like. And they're saying that, hey, it was effective and it was popular. Now, that can be debated, of course, but that's one of the points that they're using here. So now they actually have one more whereas here before they get into the resolution. And they say, whereas Canada's existing social safety net already includes basic income supports, like the support for seniors and for families with kids, and several basic income experiments have both shown positive results and debunked labor force concerns. So they're saying that, hey, we've already debunked the labor force concerns that if people got a UBI, they just wouldn't go to work. They're saying that based on their data, this isn't the case. And they're saying that, hey, we already have a basic support for income, both for seniors and with the Canada Child Benefit for families with kids. So they're saying, hey, we've already got programs like this. It's not that much of a stretch. And then they get into the actual resolution here. Now, this is what, again, they're going to ask the Liberal Party to actually implement. They say, be it resolved that the Liberal Party of Canada urge the Government of Canada to conduct a basic income cost benefit analysis, including reviews of basic income projects and studies by subject matter experts, explore streamlining current federal income supports while maintaining those for distinct needs, adjusting for regional differences and identifying new revenue sources, and work with provinces, territories, and First Nations, Métis, and Inuit to develop and implement a basic income guarantee. So these are the 3 points that they want to see included, and you probably already recognize that, hey, these aren't as aggressive in language. They're saying, we want you to conduct a study. We want you to explore streamlining these supports. Nothing here is actually holding the party to account of actually implementing a universal basic income. This is the one that's sort of saying, hey, let's do more work, let's do more studies, and then we'll come back to this later. So it's clear that the fact that these resolutions were included in this policy convention, they were voted in or brought forward by a separate organization within the Liberal Party, in the case of the fast track vote, the fact that these are even included says that there is a rising support for universal basic income inside of the Liberal Party. But the answer we're going to get on Saturday is whether or not there's enough support for them to actually vote through that first resolution. Remember, that's the more strongly worded one that would actually say to the Liberal Party of Canada, hey, we want you to get the government to actually implement something like this. Now, it doesn't give any sort of timeline, but it could be a big push towards Liberals finally supporting UBI publicly, especially going into the next election, which we think could be rather soon. It'll also be interesting to look at who votes in favor of the first one, remember the more aggressive one, and the second one, the more conservative, more laid back approach, saying, hey, just do some more research. It's going to be interesting to really get a finger on the pulse of what the Liberal Party actually believes here, especially given the fact that it could be something that they're campaigning on rather soon. And with all of this information, I'm really curious on what you have to say about all this. Do you think that it's a good idea for the party to implement the first resolution or the second one? Or are you somebody who doesn't really see UBI as a positive route forward for Canada, thinking that it could potentially bankrupt our country? And this is the talking point that a lot of people are pushing. And just let me know what you're thinking about it. It's really a controversial issue, whether you support it or you're against it. I'd love to hear from you down in the comments. And also, if you haven't already done so, make sure to subscribe to the channel, because I'm going to be keeping you up to date on all of this when it comes to this universal basic income news, because it would be a pretty large change for Canada. And also, by clicking that subscribe button, you're supporting Canadian content right here on the YouTube platform. So I'd appreciate that support. And with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video has helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.